Oh, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had enough time to grab a drink, grab a beer from the virtual bar, and settle yourselves in for this lovely Saturday lunchtime. Is it lunchtime yet? It feels like lunchtime. Saturday lunchtime session with David Monteith here at the Campfire Conversation stage. So we've had some incredible talks already from Patrick Andrews and Gaynor O'Flynn, and I'm really excited about welcoming David to our Saturday stage. Hello, welcome. I saw you were joining us for the Gaynor talk as well.
I was. It was really fascinating because when I tuned in, he was talking about how people deal with hearing about death, and I was just sitting there going, "Wow, this is amazing!" Because I talking about death is something I do a lot, and I'll explain why as we go on. So I just thought it was fascinating. Really
It's
loved
amazing
it.
that it's not where the conversation started at all, but it very naturally went over that way.
No, I
Um,
saw that because I saw what the subject was, and I came in and it was like death. I was like, "What? Hello? What's happening?" Okay.
but people were sticking with it, and we had a lot of comments, which is brilliant. We've got a lot of people watching on Facebook as well today, so yeah, I think that having those natural conversations and just seeing where the flow goes is lovely. You know, the theme of the
Mm,
weekend is all about unity and harmony, and that can, you know, spin off into so many different areas, and we're having
mm.
so many interesting conversations, I think partly fueled by this weird time that we're in,
Oh yeah.
and people being very reflective and looking at different ways of doing things. So yeah, it's exciting. It's been a fascinating morning. But how are you? How is your weekend going?
Mad. I've got three insane children. One who turns 9 tomorrow, one who
Woo!
turned 5 a couple of weeks ago, and one who turned 2 a month ago.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, one day they're going to grow up and figure out that we literally have sex once a year around about our anniversary. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Well, it was
But
my birthday last week, so there's got to be something in the water
yeah,
about 9 months ago. Yeah.
absolutely. There we go. Happy birthday. So,
Thank
I
you.
mean, but doing lockdown with three children, and you know, the 2-year-old, she, as long as we're around, she couldn't care less. But the other one's sort of missing friends, missing, you know,
Mm.
getting used to a new routine, and you can see how it's affecting them mentally, and they're going a bit mad and trying to work from home at the same time, and you're going a bit mad yourself. It's a real trial at the moment, but
It definitely, and I think the longer it goes on, the more people are starting to get a little frayed around the edges, which is why
mm,
it's been so nice to come together this weekend with people all over the world, all over the UK, and sort of connect, even if we're connecting in our spare rooms and our bedrooms and our living
yeah,
rooms.
oh, fantastic. It's the new
You know,
world. It's how we do it now.
I've been getting loads of decor tips from other people's bedrooms and seeing what's going on. I like that. But you look like you've got a very professional setup there, so I'm very impressed.
Yeah, so I mean, I am just to give people a bit of
Mm.
context into who I am. I spent a lot of my life working in the social sector. So I worked with people with drugs problems, with antisocial behaviour problems, with homelessness, all that kind of stuff. And then I decided to become an actor. Um, so that happened for
So
like
that okay.
so that happened for about 15 years, and I ended up teaching acting as well. During that time, I was one of the first black podcasters in this country,
That's it.
if not the first. 14 years ago, I started my first podcast with
Oh
my
my
best
God, that's just
friend.
one of the first podcasters ever, isn't
Well,
it?
right? I mean, yeah. In the history books, you won't find us, but I'm not bitter, not even slightly. No, it's fine. But I mean, that podcasting journey is huge, and I've just started my own podcast consultancy, Rogue Spirit Podcasting. Just sort of advising people
I'll
as
drop it in the links.
there you go. We help you launch your podcast, advise. But my big thing is it's not just a service about what technical stuff you need and what you need to do next. My big thing, and this is my attitude towards art, is that I do not believe in art for art's sake. Art is about transforming you as a human and your audience as a human. So I believe in the transformative power of podcasting. I want to help people find their voices, and find who they are, and actually use that to hone their message and their passion to transform their communities, and whatever, whether that's a business community or a geeky community, whatever it is. I try to believe in that transformative power.
That's so brilliant to hear, because that's everything. So I've been in media for about 17 years, and I started Pebble, which is a sustainable living magazine, about 4 years ago. And really, our ethos is positive storytelling for social change, because I believe media can be a force for good. It's not all about doom and gloom and terrible, slurs and statistics.
Absolutely.
So positive storytelling in all forms is absolutely what I'm passionate about, and we've had some amazing stories yesterday and today, and I'm really, really looking forward to your talk and slot as well. Can you give us a quick overview of what it's going to be about so people know what they can expect? Sure. And then I will leave you to work your magic.
So I'm one of those people, I can't not talk about things that are on my mind. One of those things is always race. It was in 2007 I made a documentary for Channel 4 about my great-great-great-grandfather and traced his journey from slavery to freedom. And I started doing a lot of talks around that time in schools and all over the place. And that kind of died down because everything has its 15 minutes and then moves on. And then when this current situation with George Floyd's kind of stirred everything back up again, I saw lots of my friends on Facebook saying, what can we do? And I thought, well, let me make a few videos to show you what can you do, because I really think it's about mindset rather than going out and doing stuff. You kind of have to start here, change your mindset.
Definitely, a lot of the work's here.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to make the world a better place, look at yourself and make a change.
You can be on the little chill stage as well.
There we go. Funnily enough, because I know what's his name is doing a set. What's his name? Oh my word. House DJ, OBE. Norman J. So as an actor and voiceover actor, one of my most recent jobs was to narrate his autobiography.
Oh wow, incredible.
Yeah.
Colourful, I should think.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. So what was my point? What was I saying? Oh yes, so I made a video. My first video was about, we shouldn't be getting angry about racism. We should be getting... racism is a symptom of the bigger problem. And we need to be getting angry about the bigger problem, which is systemic nature of bias. I woke up... I made this video, put it out for my friends, and I woke up in the morning to 30,000 views.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was like, wow. So when Pete Lawrence actually approached me to do a talk, and I was thinking... well, what if it's not focused on a specific thing? How can I find that focus? It's got to be about me. It's got to be. And I thought, well, how can I share what I'm about, where my attitudes towards race and living in this world with race come from? And I basically have to look at my generational history. My entire view of self-worth is through the lens of my forefathers. And so what I want to do is take you on a little tour of my ancestry, of the struggles that my parents, my parents' parents, and my parents' parents have faced, and how they've overcome those, and see what lessons that can be learned. So I'm just going to talk, and it's been fantastic for me to just ruminate on my intergenerational journey. Hello, sweetheart. My children.
Talking of intergenerational, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to talk. They've come to say hello. So can I say hello and then go away? But, could you show it to me afterwards, please, sweetheart? Because there's 7,000 people watching me. You can say hello. Thank you. God, I'll come and see it afterwards. You save it for me.
I'll pause it. What kind of daddy are you if you can't even give me?
What kind of daddy am I? The emotional blackmail.
It's fine. I've got a puppy whining behind me, so
the pain of ignoring them. But it's really interesting because it's going to affect them. Everything will affect them, and it affects me, and it's my father and my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. So I will take you through this journey, and I don't mind if there's questions that are relevant and people want to interrupt. I'm more than happy with kind of interruptions.
Cool. We're getting people to put their questions in the chat, and then I'll be moderating the chat as you go through. And if you're in full flow, then I'll hang on till the end, and we can sort of pick up on some points then.
Cool.
That's probably the easiest way to
I tend to talk really fast when I get excited, so if you need me to...
So do I.
Cool.
Cool.
So hello, Kristen. I can see Kristen in the comments, and thanks for linking me up with Pete. So yeah, I've said a bit about who I am, and I have 3 daughters here. And why I found talking about death really interesting was... Could you close the door, sweetheart?
What did you say again?
I'll tell you in a minute. Could you close the door, my love? Thank you. So I have 3 daughters here, but the reason I found talking about death really interesting is because I've had 4 daughters. My second daughter died the day before she was born. We actually have 2 dates we celebrate. We have her death day and her birthday. I don't like to use the word stillborn because it's a nice medical term, but it allows people uh, to not embrace the fact that my daughter died. You know, and it's really important for me that people know that there has been it's changed me as a person. I am no longer the person I was before that happened, and that's an integral part of my life now. And they're great, and as horrible as it is, there's positives to that. It's made me stronger, more resilient. I've been able to speak literally around the world about it, and about being a man, and about being a black man in that environment, and how I deal with grief, and how I forge my path ahead. What's that got to do with race? You may wonder. And where that comes in is discovering, there's a group that do a lot of stats, a scientific group that do a lot of stats around maternity. And one of the stats have shown that black women are 5 times more, that black women are 121% more likely to have a stillbirth than a white woman, and Asian women are 66% more likely to have a stillbirth than a white woman. The first thing that people say, oh, is it genetic? And with the best will in the world, it's the most disingenuous question possible. It's absolute nonsense, because what it suggests is there's no genetic diversity amongst black people. Well, what we do know is that in Africa, there is more genetic diversity in Africa than there is in the entirety of Europe. So it doesn't make sense as a question. And what that highlights to me is that there are so many misconceptions about race that pervade our society in every way. And actually, what is interesting to learn is that being married to a black person or an Asian person, or having mixed race children, doesn't necessarily mean that you are not racist yourself. My wife is white. She says she's learning every day. There are things she would have never known if it wasn't for being married to me. And she says that even today, she is able now to recognize certain behavior. Now, she is categorically, I don't think, a racist person, but she says she's still learning things about herself that aren't helping the race conversation. And that's quite an interesting for her. Now, we've been married 10 years this year. It's our decade. And we were married in a church on a hill in Jamaica called Carmel Moravian Church. I'm going to come back to this church, so hold that in your head. My modern day experience of race is interesting. I've lost count of the amount of times I've gone to an event. So my best friend, who I podcast with, called Barry, we've been to many events to do with podcasting. The amount of times we've been mistaken for the help because we've dressed up nice is interesting. And you notice I laugh because it's just one of those other stories that people often go, oh, how horrible. I'm like, this is just another one of those stories that we tell. And interestingly, a lot of my white friends have checked in on me at this time to see how I'm doing. None of my black friends have, because they know that this kind of pressure is par for the course. Anyway, as an actor, I lost count of the amount of auditions I've had for drug dealer, thief, Rastafarian musician. It's ridiculous, and more. Some I've even walked out of because I'm like, this is just ridiculous. I've been told several times that it's really hard to find good black actors. Do I know any? I've been asked by directors to act more black, whatever that means. I didn't realize there was a template for sort of being black. I've been told that I'll never be in a period piece or a war movie because there was no black people involved, while actual history flies in the face of that. If I go back in my past as a teenager, I'd say I was scared, and it still it affects me today. Now, I have chosen, and I've chosen to live in England. I'm proud of where I've chosen to live. I enjoy it. There's a reason I'm here. And yet, I have this instinctual fear of the Union Jack. I have an instinctual fear of the English flag. And it comes from being a teenager, being chased by skinheads and the like, trying to beat the crap out of me with a flag. Shouting, there ain't no black in the Union Jack. People of my age will remember that phrase well. There ain't no black in the Union Jack. That's, that's why, people go, what's wrong with being patriotic? Absolutely nothing. But you have to understand, for me, it comes with a certain attachment, which is really hard to let go of. I have a fear of the police. In my 20s, when I'd started driving, I used to get stopped a lot. one year, and a lot of my white friends would be like, oh, you know, when we all get stopped by the police, I've been stopped by the police. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start counting. And there was 1 year that I decided I was going to start counting and keep track. And that year, I was stopped by the police 40 times. 40 times. I'm laughing at it. I just find it hilarious. The only time, and walking along the street with my friends, the amount of times I was stopped. You know, I used to live near Tottenham, which was a hotbed of racial unrest, and we used to get stopped. Sorry, it's not even funny. But what they would always say was, you match the description. And in those times we saw the person who they actually caught, and you go, they look nothing like me. It's amazing. But there has been studies that show that to a white person it's harder to differentiate between BAME people than it is for BAME people to differentiate between white people. They even did a study in the States where they had a picture of a white man and they had a voice read in standard American accent, a bit of dialogue over it, and then they showed a picture of an Asian man and they got the same voice to read a dialogue, and it was down there in black and white that the white people watching found it harder to understand the text when it was read over the picture of the Asian man, which is, I mean, it blows my mind. If that doesn't speak to implicit bias, I don't know what. What was I talking about? The police. Yeah, so there was fear of the police. With all of that, and I have to ask myself, where are all these assumptions and attitudes and unconscious assumptions and attitudes coming from that have plagued my life? And I started thinking about when I first became aware of race. I was 8 years old. I was at school, and there was a girl. I remember her so clearly, Joanne Bullen. In my 8-year-old mind, she's gorgeous. I remember her mum being pretty hot as well. In my 8-year-old mind, she was gorgeous, and I'd fancied her for years. She was my first major crush. Fancied her for years, and I went up to her one day and I asked her out. And I mean, I was 8. What was I gonna do? Where was we gonna go on a date? I have no idea. But I asked her out, and she said the words, "I wish I." No, she said, "You'd be all right if you were white." And I wasn't angry. I was upset, but I wasn't angry because I thought, yeah, she's right, you know. And what you have to understand is that because of my social conditioning growing up in a country like this, my default is always white. White people have said to me, yeah, but when you read a book, you picture the antagonist as black, don't you? I went, no, I don't. It's white, because that's the conditioning that this socialization has done for me. And I went home full of this, and I thought about everything I'd seen on TV. The best people were white, the adventurers were white, the scientists were white, everyone was white. So what I had in my head was, you know, white is bright. I just made that up. White was great. White was everything. And I went home to my mother, and do you know what I said to my mother? I said, I wish I was white. And she sat me down and she started to tell me about Jamaican heroes. She started to tell me about black scientists and doctors and so on. And she told me about my ancestors. And for the first time, I started to feel pride in this colour and strength from that pride. It was such a watershed moment, and it has defined my attitude for the rest of my life. So I'm grateful to my mother, and I am grateful to Joanne, because without her that moment wouldn't have come so soon. It's also quite interesting, so what I meant to say with the police is quite interesting, that growing up, my peers and our parents had to have the talk with us, and by the talk I don't mean the birds and the bees. In fact, I don't actually, we've never had that conversation, which could explain all the children. But the talk was how to deal, as a young black person, how to deal with police when they stopped you, because we would get stopped. It was taken as read. And I've talked to a lot of people my age now with their children, and they've had to have the same conversation with their teenagers. But anyway, I'm grateful to Joanne, I'm grateful to my mother. So let's go back a generation now. My father met my mother in this country, in the UK, in the 60s. They came over shortly after Windrush. They came separately. My father came to study carpentry. My mother came to be a nurse. My father gave up carpentry when he realised as a black person it wasn't really happening for him. And he went to work, like so many others, for London Transport, and he stayed there until he left the country. Now, that wave of immigration was one of the most educated, and I had an uncle who was a principal of a school, and he came here and he ended up working on the buses. They tried to integrate, and they found themselves pushed into ghettos. They ended up there for support, they ended up there for protection for some reasons. This was the time when they tried to find somewhere to live, on the doors, tried to find somewhere to rent, on the doors it would say no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, which is something my father and my wife's father had in common. Actually, because he's Irish. My father would tell me these stories of being called a nigger in the streets, to be fair, I got that when I was young, of being spat at, of having to face off a gang on his own, and they said the only way he got out of that night was to pick up a metal bar and say, who's going down first? He had to show no fear, even though he was quaking inside. What I learnt from my father was that I would have to work twice as hard as a white man to achieve what I wanted to. Not necessarily because so many were dead set against me, but there's a fear of the other, and I'm definitely other. As long as there is other, there is a fear of that. There's an instinctual pushback, an instinctual resistance, which is about, again, looking at yourself and asking yourself, where are these assumptions, preconceptions, unconscious ones coming from? Do I have biases I don't even know? Learning that I would need to work twice as hard is something that stood me in good stead. But I've done that all the while knowing that he had to work 4 times as hard to get where he wanted to go. Now, I take so much in. I would say that man, my father, Kenneth John Monteith, is my hero. If someone said to me, who's your hero? It's him. I've never seen someone so dedicated to the things that he believed in, to finding the best in people, to smiling against all the odds, to find the smile and to keep falling forward. That was my father. And I'll sing his song loud and proud. He came here with nothing. And when he left, he'd bought me a flat, he'd paid off his mortgage completely, and he'd built a gorgeous home in Jamaica. He died 3 months before my first daughter was born, but he died in Jamaica, which was the place that he never ever stopped calling home. And his family, our family, is a ridiculous family. He was one of 15 children. Weirdly, so is my wife's father. And it's a crazy family full of alpha people. They're so alpha, and yet they all get along. Now, he and his siblings all call their parents, I find this hilarious, Uncle John and Aunt P. Why mum and dad, I don't know. It's really interesting, actually, because I think of my father, and I don't recall him ever saying to me, I love you. But that he did love me, I was never in doubt of. It's a really interesting paradigm. So, yeah, Uncle John. So we're going back even a step now. We've dealt with the fact that my father came here full of hope and met so much prejudice, but never gave up and kept smiling. And if you look at his friends over here, such a mixture of black and white and Indian and so on. And I took a lot from that. I learned a lot about people from that. So Uncle John and Aunt P, all my father and his siblings, they all hold Uncle John and Aunt P in a special reverence. And they came from a hill community in a parish in Jamaica called Westmoreland, and a community called Kilmarnock. And it's interesting that Kilmarnock has a Scottish name. It is a Scottish name. It doesn't just sound Scottish, it is a Scottish name. Now, not only was my grandfather a beloved patriarch, but he was revered by his community. And I need to understand why this man who died 2 months before I was due to meet him for the first time, before my 6th birthday, was so respected. I mean, I was amazed growing up that every time I went to Jamaica, my surname, Monteith, was enough to earn me respect in certain places. It's, It's interesting to me that in recent weeks, Uncle Anthony Joshua, the boxer, caused a lot of controversy by suggesting that you shouldn't invest in white businesses, that black people should invest in black businesses. But what people, and he got called racist for this. But what people need to, number one, we kind of need to learn new definitions. And I understand that it's hard to hold on to it, but the way we use the name racist has changed. And if anyone wants me to define that later on, I can do that. But it's changed, and we need to move with that. We need to understand what the word privilege actually means in this day and age, and we need to understand the word's bias. So calling Anthony Joshua racist is a misnomer in many ways, but also for this. Investing in your own community is an old concept. My grandfather realized that a community that doesn't invest in itself is one that will not flourish, especially if that investment isn't coming from anywhere else. If your community is still at a disadvantage, you need to invest in it to build it, to give it the clout, to be able to make decisions and to be able to have a voice. And the stats in this country show that black businesses are more likely to get business loans rejected than white businesses. That ethnic sounding surnames have a higher rate of rejection than white sounding surnames when it comes to job applications. And I could go on more and I could show you the stats, but I'm not. I want to focus on the achievements of my family. So my grandfather, the man they called Uncle John, he built a bank for his local community. He built a school for the local children, and he built a church for the community to gather in, to have a focal point. He wasn't just a patriarch to his family, but to his community as well. And he loved to play the Hallelujah chorus in a church called Carmel Moravian Church. You remember the church I mentioned before? The one I got married in? We're going to come back to that. Now, I don't know too much about my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather, except the one of them was called David, which is hilarious, because when I discovered that, I for a while, on all my documents, I put David Monteith II, and there was one time when I got stopped by police, and I know how it works with police now. You see the car behind you, you work out they're following you, then they go, woo, and you pull over, and they pull over a few feet behind. Two of them get out, one walks towards you, the other one stays by the car, and then when they're engaged in conversation with you, the other one comes to join. I got so used to that. One day it was like, they're following me. Woo! I pulled over and they didn't stop. They pulled alongside to me, and you kind of wind down your window. That was the days when you didn't have automatic windows. And he said to me, "Are you a prince?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I must be." And he went, "Oh, is that why your details say David Monteith II?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's right." And that was hilarious. And they drove off. They said, "Have a good day." And I was like, "That was hilarious. I loved that." What was I talking about? Got distracted by the police. So I don't know my great-great-grandfather, one of them called David, but I do know about my great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Anyaso, and he was from the Orca region in what is now called Nigeria. He was an Igbo, from the Igbo tribe. Now, I said what's now called Nigeria because Nigeria should never have been a country. The British decided that they were going to they were going to divide up Africa. And if you look at the map, you'll see very straight lines, which is not how how countries organically develop. And it's ridiculous. The north of Nigeria is so radically different from the south in physicality, in terrain, in people. The south is Christian, the north is Muslim. They speak different languages. They have different outlooks on life. It caused the Biafran War, which caused a civil war, which caused thousands and thousands of lives. And that's all down to that British intervention there. It should never have been a country. Anyway, the dates here are a little debatable, but it was between the late 1790s and the very early 1800s that at the age of 10, my ancestor was kidnapped into slavery. Now, in 2007, I made a documentary about this man's life, Anyaso, and I was really privileged to be able to travel to Nigeria and, using certain anthropological clues, ascertain the region to within 40 kilometres that he came from. I met tribal elders and I heard their stories, and it's important to note that their ancestors' understanding of slavery was very, very different to ours. The dehumanizing structure of the Atlantic slave trade was not something that was on their horizon. So when people start this nonsense about slavery has always existed, blah, 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 it simply means those people are showing their intellectual limitations and haven't done their research before opening their mouths about what slavery, domestic slavery, was like there, and the differences between that and the Atlantic slave trade. Domestic slavery didn't dabble in dehumanization. It was a way of paying off debts, and you could still rise to a place of prominence once you'd paid off that debt, and so on. Now, we surmise that his sale into slavery was brought about by the Efik people who were closer to the coast. And I was able on this journey to meet a descendant of the Efik people, of the Efik prince, whose people may have been responsible for selling mine. And he took me to see his people's treasures, which are lying around in the grass, gathering dust. And he said, look, we sold our people, and for what? And he looked around it and he kicked this thing that was lying there. And his anger was palpable. And the generational regret that reached through the ages was so... it went so deep in him, and the effects of the slave trade have affected so many people in so many ways. People say, well, it happened before I was born, what can I do about that? But you need to realize there is a transgenerational effect. So my ancestor Anyaso found himself in Jamaica, went across on a slave ship, and I always use the phrase, I don't say he was a slave, he was enslaved. He was a person that was put into slavery. He was a slave is not his identity. His identity was Anyaso and everything that comes with that name. However, he was bought by a man whose surname was Monteith, a Scottish man. And what you have to understand is every time you say my name, every time you say David Monteith, you are calling me by my ancestor's slave owner's name. And I just need you to let that sink in for a while as we talk about transgenerational effects. However, he was bought, and because he was never going to be allowed to keep his name, he was given the name Toby. Now, later on, he found Christianity, and, you know, there's an interesting conversation to be had about Christianity and its relationship to slavery and so on there, which maybe we could have another time. But he was baptized and received a new name, Archibald. Now, over the next 35 years, he worked hard, he used his wits, he saved money, so that some 35 years later, he was able to buy his freedom. He offered his master £40, and he's not... You know what his master said? He goes, you're worth 90. And the reason was he was looking at his worth per year. There would be 3 years until slavery was abolished. So in that 3 years, if his master let him go, he would lose essentially £90, £30 a year. He said, you're worth 90. That's what you'd have to pay me. Archibald went away disappointed. And the next day, his master said, Mistress and I, for some unknown, weird reason, the master said, Mistress and I have had a talk, we've talked about it, and we'll let you go for 50. Archibald gave him 40 and owed him 10. Now, listen to this. Let me just get this up so I can read it to you. This is from when he was free, he went to work for a church, and the pastor of that church was like, Archibald, you're such an amazing man. Let me write down your story. So he wrote down, he told this guy his story, who put it in the Moravian church magazine. And that's how we have this whole story, because one of my aunts went and found it in the church archives in Philadelphia, I think. And we are incredibly lucky. We're probably one of the few, probably one of 3 families in Jamaica that can trace their ancestors in this way. But here's what he said about his freedom. At once I paid down all my savings and was soon afterwards able to complete the required sum, and my certificate of freedom was signed. Oh, how full my heart was, how overflowing with thanks and praise to God. This day has always been to me a day of special rejoicing and thanksgiving. It was the 1st of June 1837. The first thing I did on obtaining my freedom was to put on my Sunday clothes and ride to Carmel, where Brother Collis was now stationed. Everyone was surprised to see me appearing in this manner on a weekday, but I cried aloud from a distance, "Rejoice with me! Thank God, I am free!" And you can hear the joy in his voice. 1st of June is also my third daughter's birthday, but for me, it's not only that, I call it Monteith Emancipation Day. This was, like I said, this was 3 years before slavery was abolished. He could have waited, but the desire for freedom was so strong. And this relates to me today to what you are seeing happening in the streets. The reason there are protests and sometimes riots is because this desire to be equal, to be seen as someone on an equal playing field, is so strong it will not go away. It will find an outlet, and if that outlet happens to be violent, that may be a shame, but it's understandable and almost naive not to expect it, because this is building and 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 building, and it's been building for 400 years. When my great-great-great-grandfather was freed, he went to work at a church on a hill called Carmel Moravian Church. Remember that church? He earned £11 a year and he's buried there. My grandfather played the Hallelujah chorus on an organ there. My wife and I were married there. I stand on the shoulders of giants. My desire for justice and true freedom is strong. My eyes are open, my heart is fierce, and my smile is large. Don't mistake that for passive obedience or submission. No, sir. But do you see what stories I can't tell you? I can't tell you stories that aren't dependent on black people's relationship to white people. Stories from before slaveries, because those aren't the stories I've been brought up with. I said before, the only stories I've been brought up on are the fact that we were slaves. Can you see how that will push my own sense of racial esteem down as I grow, and that's all I've got in my subconscious? Can you see how that will raise unconsciously the status of white people if those are the only stories? And yet the stories are manifold from pre-colonial history, and we don't talk about it. Have you heard of the Benin Empire? It's an empire that stretched from African coast to African coast. The African continent is not a small one. It lasted from 1180 to 1867. It had a university teaching 1,500 people, when in Europe we were still scrabbling to work out what potatoes were. All I knew as a child was the diagrams of that damn slave ship looked like, and nothing of these pre-colonial achievements that would help level that playing field. Do you know the guy who wrote Three Musketeers? Dumas, mixed race. His father was from Haiti. And do you know his father, most of his swashbuckling stories were based on his father, because his father was one of Napoleon's top generals. And Napoleon was very jealous of him because apparently he was very good looking. He was, a hit with the ladies. He was very, there's stories of him taking on a whole regiment of his own and coming out unscathed. And do you know he fell out with Napoleon about the African campaign, and Napoleon was like, "Well, sling your hook then." He took a boat back, which got shipwrecked, and he got taken into prison. I think it was in Spain. I could be wrong there. It could be Italy. And they held him captive, waiting for a ransom to be paid, which Napoleon never paid, and it destroyed his health, and he lost an eye. And when he was finally released, he went back to France to find that black people weren't allowed inside Paris, and to find that Napoleon was trying to bring back colonial slavery. Did you know? I could go on about the did you knows. If these stories, and I'm fed up of the stories that always put us in a certain, there was one year if you wanted to watch a movie with a black lead, your choices were The Butler, The Help, and 12 Years a Slave. Just think about that for a moment. Think about, they may have been great films, they may have been emotional, they may have been well directed, but think about the position they've put black people. I want these stories that are just great. I want black stories that have nothing to do with our relationship with colonialism or slavery, that just elevate. Is it any wonder that at the very basis of our modern system there are assumptions and preconceptions that unconsciously shape our daily interaction with each other and with the systems of rule, law and medicine? That black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women, and that and Asian women, and that in America those stats are comparable to African American women, Latino women, and Native American women. It's not a coincidence. When I made the documentary and I met the tribal elders in Nigeria, they gave me a name, Nwabofu, which means the child is a consoler, because what they said was what was lost has returned. I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I know there's still work to be done, and that's fine. What I need is people to believe that what I'm saying isn't just made up. Let's do that work. Thank you so much for your time. That's kind of where what I want to say ends. I've taken you back 200 years, and I'm more than happy to. There's literally not a question you can't ask me. If you violently disagree with some of my conclusions, I'm more than happy to hear that. So, yeah.
Oh, David, thank you. I've just been listening, transfixed, absolutely transfixed at your stories, and I just want more stories, to be honest, because I think that is the power of the change that we need, is realising all those stories that we don't hear and we weren't taught, and that don't get enough space for people to consider, and those stories are how we're going to change our mindset, which is what you were talking about right at the start, and give ourselves a new framework to respect and everybody that we need to be respecting. There's been some amazing comments. Oh,
Georgina, you're frozen in my eyes. Let it go, let it go. I'm just looking back while while Georgina's frozen. Oh, there you are.
oh, sorry.
You froze. Look, on dinner, I've got a list of books.
Yeah, you froze for me. Don't amazing.
Yeah. If Georgina freezes, I'm still here, David.
Hello, Mike.
Hopefully I'm back.
I got these books.
Yes. Amazing. And I think it's I know there's a lot of focus now on changing our education system and re-looking at our history and making our history more inclusive and more diverse, and hearing from so many different voices.
I'm actually going to say, I've got real problems with the word diverse at the moment. It's personal to me. No, don't be sorry. It's actually a great word. And it's an important word and it's a good word. But my problem is that it's become this catchphrase, and I think the more it becomes a catchphrase, the more meaningless it becomes. So, for example, my best friend's written a book and people said to him, there's some great examples of diversity in it. And he's like, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to reflect the school I grew up in. And it was just for him, it was a reflection of real life. It wasn't an attempt for diversity. And people go, we must try and make it diverse. No, don't make it diverse. Make it reflect real life. And I think if we use the word reflection, we kind of deflect from the place where some people get really angry about it. And I think it's, for me, and that's just my personal preference with it. But yes, sorry to interrupt.
It's true. No. Yeah, I mean, some of the comments have been, I think, really resonating with people, that how much they don't know, and wanting that different knowledge and wider range of knowledge that is reflecting the stuff that we've missed. Can you read out what that says? Because I can't see.
It says, "When We Ruled." It's by Robin Walker, and it's a 700-page tome on pre-colonial African history.
Amazing.
There is it's quite expensive now. There's a much smaller version. The author did a version which is much more accessible and easier to get into, and has a kind of study guide to it. And I can't remember what that's called now, but if you search Robin Walker, you'll be able to find that. If you want to bring it closer to home, I love this one, Black British History. and it's kind of an encyclopedia of black contribution to British history, way back to the Tudors. You know.
Incredible. I'm going to put some of these links in the chat for people as well. There was a question we had earlier actually that goes back to your what you were doing when you were talking about your dad, and Mel says, do you think it cost your dad personally to maintain such positivity in the face of such challenges? And she said it's a characteristic you've clearly inherited.
It's really interesting because my dad's character was completely caught up with his Christianity, and what he got from that was strength of purpose and strength of character. And actually, you look at our lineage, and there are so many characteristics which seem to have come down through that generations of pushing on and finding a way through, and so on. I think that a lot of his. I would observe my dad and certain issues just sitting there going, shaking his head. And what would accompany that shake of a head would be a little laugh as he kind of put it in its place. And I just think, I don't really know if it cost him. I don't know if it costs me, because I feel purpose in talking. I don't get tired. I don't get fatigue for talking about it. I do get fatigued by people I know and respect and I love who suddenly show me who they really are. That's painful. I do get fatigued by. I remember I was going to Poland to do some Shakespeare, and I was the only black person in the cast and crew, and we're travelling over, and I thought, I know, to coin a phrase, I'm going to be the only black in the village, so to speak, and I know I'm going to get looked at. And to be fair, most of it's probably just going to be curiosity, and I'm fine with that, but I've still got to get my head in a space where I can deal with it. Some people wouldn't be able to. I can. I just got to get my head in. And everyone was like, oh, you're exaggerating. It's not going to be that bad. It will be fine. 2 days later, they are furious on my behalf. And I'm like, I'm not angry. Why I'm angry is that I'm a grown-up telling you something and you didn't believe me. Well, did you think I was just making it up to make people feel sorry for me? No. And that's fatiguing. It's people not believing. But when I find people who, I've got no problem with ignorance. If I find people who are ignorant, but they're willing to learn, they're willing to sit on the knee-jerk reaction and defensiveness, which is based on a false premise, and they're willing to go, all right, okay, I recognise these feelings of defensiveness in me, but let me hear what you're saying. That makes my heart sing.
Well, I mean, that openness to change is what we need, isn't it? It's changing people's minds, changing their perceptions. You know, that's where you can win. It's and how are you? Yeah. Sorry, I wanted to know. So, how are you talking to your daughters about your family history?
So we did at school. They did something about take a picture. Tell us something about your ancestors. And I'm like, okay, this question's a tough one because most people in my daughter's situations aren't going to know anything about their ancestors. So it's a really hard thing to ask. But that gave me the opportunity to talk about what slavery was and her fate. And we often talk about it, and it's quite hard. Unfortunately, she got into it. I was telling my wife about something I'd learned about sort of in America in the 1800s, which is horrific. And they used to have a thing at carnivals called hit the nigger baby. And they'd kind of give you they'd have baseballs where you'd kind of hit the baby, and they'd get wet nurses to feed them up. So if you hit them right, they'd vomit milk and everyone would cheer.
Real babies.
I was in tears reading. I used to use them for the University of Florida has just banned the use of the word gator bait during their American football matches. So apparently they'd shout at the opposition, gator bait, because their team's called the Gators. But they've banned it now because the historical etymology of that word is that they used to use black babies for bait when they were catching alligators. So I was talking to my wife about this. My daughter came in and went, what? And I thought, well, I have to tell her. And her face, she's 9, she's 8, it's only 9. Her face, and so we have to have it. Now she's very, very fair. I don't think at first glance you would think she was mixed race, so she's got a certain advantage and privilege coming her way. But I think it's important to her to know what her father's been through, what some of her cousins have been through, and it's a little bit by her. Actually, her first journey was getting to love her hair. Now, there's a whole big thing about Afro hair, there's whole politics around it. So she's grown up, and her standard of beauty is kind of defined by Disney. and the only black character in Princess in Disney, it basically looks like a white character that's coloured in. So it was literally a 7-year journey to get her to appreciate her frizzy hair, because the socialization was telling her that she did not conform to the standard of beauty that is classically accepted. So it's a journey of inches, and I don't really know how to do it, and I feel like I'm struggling a lot. What we try to do, and I think this is really important, is, and it's something that my best friend and I call stealth diversity, which is just include minorities in everything you do. Don't make a big fuss about it, just have them present. Let them be there. Let them lead a narrative. And so as they grow up, what's happening, and to be fair, you are conditioning them. You're conditioning them to see everyone on the same playing field. That's what you're doing. And I've got no problem with that conditioning. And I just want her to have all peoples just in that same playing field on her head. And so here's a book with a white person leading the narrative. Here's a book with a black person leading the narrative. I wish I had a book with an Asian person leading the narrative. All people's leading narrative. No, level playing field, from socialized right from the beginning.
And I think I mean, heartbreakingly, it just points to how many different social, how many different directions our social conditioning comes from at such an early age, and how many things we have to fix, as you say, inch by inch. Day by day, changing the makeup of things, and that reflection which
is quite interesting to me, because people, like I said, lots of my white friends are checking into me. How are you at this time? I'm like, well, pretty much the same as I was yesterday, the day before, last year, the year before, because this is nothing new to me. People have been killed by the police for years. I remember the Broadwater Farm riots in Tottenham for the same reason, and the Brixton riots for the same reason, and that's over here, let alone what's happening on a daily basis. Not even killing, the harassment, people being, it's nothing new, but something's changed. Something has changed in the social conversation. I've had people say, for the first time, I understand what privilege means. I understand, and it's great, because I believe, and the fact that a statue was pulled down, while I'm not advocating vandalism, there has never been change or revolution without a monument, a statue, or a building coming down. Never. So I don't think we need to chase down the rest of the statues and tear them down. Or not that, but we've got more important things to do. But that one came down is so hugely symbolic of a tipping point. I truly believe it will take time, but things are changing. Definitely change. We've tipped.
Yeah.
And anyone who is parading their ignorance and bias around her needs to be careful, because what learning from history will tell us is that you have now joined the losing side. Mm-hmm. You will be portrayed by history in a bad light, so be careful. Just read the room. Read the room, people.
Definitely read the room. Read the books.
Read the books. And also see that no matter how much we may talk and shout for equality and agitate, and that agitation is important, and that civil disobedience is important, none of it will happen unless it's economic as well.
Yeah.
All change is precipitated by economics.
Definitely. And I think we're in such turbulence at the moment that people are more ready to question everything. And I feel there's this sense of anger that things have to change now.
And it's all tied up with class. It's all tied up with class as well.
There's been some amazing comments. So Kristen has said, thank you, David, for giving your time and energy to us to help deepen our understanding and expand our awareness. It's had a huge impact on me and my understanding of Black history and our entrenched prejudices. Constant work. It's being open to the fact we have so much learning to do that is important. Karen says, something has definitely changed. I've never realised my white privilege before, and it feels mad to say that now. How did I not see it? But I'm learning now and putting the work in. So I think
that's
this
what I care about.
This is it.
I don't care that you didn't see it. The fact that you do see it is, yeah.
That's it. It's happening. We had one comment that I just, Philip Parr has said, I'm always enjoying hearing David speak. If David's happy with this, a shameless plug, because his story of Archibald Monteith and some other stories are in a part of the Windrush cycle of stories, all read and performed by David, made by Parabola and featured currently at eyewitnesshistory.co.uk. So we'd love to go and find out more about that. And are you doing anything more with your family history? Have you done more with your family history?
No, I kind of I kind of got distracted by. It's really interesting. I did this documentary, and if I made it today, it would be very different because there was a lot of direction in it that wasn't really from me. But I was younger then, and I kind of got distracted by stillbirth actually, because when my daughter died, I really took a platform for that. And if you'd like to see some of my poems and speaking about stillbirth and its impact, head over to graceinaction.org.uk. We also have a YouTube channel as well, and there's some talks I've done there and some poems and stuff.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for a really feels revolutionary, even though it shouldn't be, kind of talk. And just I want to know all about all of your amazing family. I really hope that you do something with it more in this time, because I think so many people would love to read that.
If anyone does,
yes.
a distant cousin of mine wrote Archibald Monteith, Ibo, Jamaican Moravian. Her name's Maureen Warner Lewis.
Okay, I'm going to find the link for that, guys, and put it in the chat for you. Have that. And how can people reach out and find you, David, if they want to?
Cool. I am a media whore, which means I've got no privacy settings on social media. So David Monteith, you can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, YouTube. And Grace in Action as well. It'll all come back to me somehow. And I'm really easy to contact. If you do contact me or try to friend me, do tell me where, because I've suddenly had so many contacts, I'm losing track of so and so.
I bet.
Thank you, and thank you, Georgina and Mike, because you guys must be working so hard. You must be knackered. Thank you for your input.
I've also got a load of DIY going on this afternoon, so I'm trying to manage that out the back, and a whining puppy. So no, it's all fine. But I hope you find some time and some space this weekend to.
It's my daughter's birthday tomorrow, so no.
Chaos, absolute chaos. Well, enjoy that anyway. Thank you so much. I think everyone would, give you a standing room of applause if they could, and if you could hear. But
thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Take care.